Hey race fans, Alex Weaver here. You guys just got done watching episode 2 of Race Hub's What If series, all about Carl Edwards. So now we want to break the episode down.
So what if a few moments in Carl Edwards' career were just slightly different?
All right, so let's get into things. I'm going to welcome in Jonathan Merriman. I'm also going to welcome in one of our friends from Fox Sports, Bob Pockrass. Bob, we didn't scare you off from last episode. You came back.
I thought it was I didn't scare you off. I'm glad to be back for another great discussion.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. All right, so this episode was all about Carl Edwards. Let's break down a few moments in his career that if they were slightly different, what would have changed in his NASCAR history. 2011, Tony Stewart wins a championship on that tiebreaker. Would Carl have stayed at Roush Fenway?
I don't think so. I think he would have still gone to Joe Gibbs Racing. I think that he would have followed the money and followed the strength of that team to that organization. I think Carl Edwards was a guy who was going to do the best for Carl Edwards. And that's not a knock on Carl Edwards. That's what every driver pretty much does. They're going to look out for what's best for them. And I think at that time, what was best for Carl Edwards was to move on.
I disagree with Bob. I think if you look at the possibility of the tiebreaker going the other way, Carl wins a championship. You know, money is involved with that as well on the race team side. And I think that could have potentially stopped the slippage of Roush Fenway Racing from being one of the premier teams in NASCAR to, you know, kind of being one of the next best teams in NASCAR. And I think that really would have propelled that organization. I really think it would have set Carl up long-term to be more of a, you know, a Mark Martin type of guy who's going to spend the bulk of his career at one place. I think it really could have lengthened Carl's career. And I mean, I think the sequence of events that could have potentially set off, if not for, you know, essentially he tied. He came up 1 point short of outright beating Tony Stewart for that championship, could have really changed the trajectory not only of Carl and his legacy, but also of Jack Roush Racing.
Bobby's starting off already disagreeing with you. This should be good. Okay, let's look at 2016. Leading Homestead, the late caution created the restart where Carl wrecks. Would he have won the championship and not retired?
That's a great question. And I think that's probably the biggest what if of this what if series on when you talk about Carl Edwards. Part of me says maybe he'd continue because he could see a path to a championship. But part of me says no, that he saw that the championship, when it comes down to one race, that it just didn't necessarily fit his style, and said, you know, look, I've had a great career. I have my health. I'm going to kind of hang up the driving suit.
I think if it would have come down to him having a championship before that, I think he would have already been gone. I do think that if he would have won in 2016, it would have just made it easier for everyone to accept him walking away. I don't think it would have changed his decision at all. I think basically we get wrapped in this, you know, would Carl still be here if he had a championship? I think the opposite. I think he would have ran out quicker and wouldn't have had a January press conference. He would have told us in Victory Lane after Homestead, hey, I got this. I'm out of here. So I don't think championship or no championship, I think that decision was made before he even went to Homestead.
Okay, this is kind of a future what-if question. If things were still the same, his career ended exactly the same, do you think Carl Edwards is a Hall of Fame inductee and a Hall of Fame member coming up in the future? Or do you think he should already be one?
I think he should already be one. I thought it was a little bit of a snub that he wasn't nominated on his first the first chance he got. I think there are probably people who are bitter that he just walked away, and, you know, except for coming to a few races, he really hasn't been, you know, been seen too much in the garage or in the industry. But you look at his career, 28 wins, 38 wins, I think, on the Xfinity side and title there. Just one of the most dominant drivers over, you know, a 10-year period. I mean, I look at his talent and I look at what he accomplished, and I'm like, you know, why isn't he in the Hall of Fame? I think he definitely should be in the Hall of Fame. And, you know, I think if anybody says, oh, he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame because he didn't win a championship, you know, you can't compare championships now to what they were, 10, 15, 20 years ago. With this system, it's about making it to the championship. It's about winning races. And I think Carl Edwards did that. And, anybody who says that he doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame, I just can't see it. I just don't. I'd be like, man, what were you watching over the last 10 years?
I'm going to say he doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame yet. I think he eventually I think he's deserving to be in the Hall of Fame eventually. I think there's a couple other guys that should be, considered and be voted in before Carl. I don't think a championship would have changed whether or not he is a Hall of Famer. You look at some other, we talked about, Mark Martin being in without a championship, but Mark's got some more wins than Carl's got. But in due time, I think Carl will make it to the Hall of Fame. But it does not upset me one bit that he's not in there right now.
All right. Well, if/when Carl Edwards gets into the Hall of Fame, if there is not a backflip at some point in that week of the Hall of Fame duties, I'm going to be extremely disappointed. Bob, we always appreciate you joining us and breaking down the knowledge, because I always like when somebody can disagree when Merriman.
I'm just glad you didn't ask me to do a black backflip myself, because that would not have been a pretty sight.
Next time, I will be sure to add that on there. Merriman, you too. So you just watched the episode on Race Hub of Carl Edwards and how moments in his career would have changed the history and the trajectory of his career. So I'm going to welcome in now Danny B and Eric Estepp. Guys, if Carl were still in the picture today, do we think that Carl would be racing, first of all? Because every time that a ride opens up, or every time that there's even a one-off, everybody wants Carl Edwards in the car. So would Carl still be racing? Eric, I'm going to start with you.
I very much share that same sentiment. It'd be great to see Carl Edwards back in a race car at some point, but I just don't see it in the cards. The way he left as abruptly as he did, the fact that it sounds like he was at least discussed as the potential replacement in the 42 car this year and perhaps turned that down, it might be wishful thinking at this point, unfortunately.
I agree with Eric. Like, I'd love to wake up to the breaking news, Carl Edwards returning in the 48 car or something like that, but I don't think it's going to happen.
I think given Carl's age, how long he's been out of the car, the opportunities he's had, he literally gave up one of the best rides in the Cup Series, and to think he's going to get back in something that's any less than that, you're dreaming. He's done.
Well, a lot of opportunities for Carl to win the championship. So if he were racing still to this day, would he be a championship contender in the NASCAR Cup Series?
I don't know. I'm gonna be contrary. I'm gonna say no. I think if you go back and look at what Carl preferred in terms of aero packages and this, that, and the other, I think he would be a threat on the short tracks where these cars are a little bit more uncorked and we don't have as much downforce. But I don't think, given his driving style and coming up through, dirt mods and sliding cars around, I don't think he would be very happy with how these race cars drove on 1.5-mile tracks. I think he would be a threat at short tracks, and given the way the playoffs shape up, especially ending at Phoenix, if he could get there, I think he might be, but I think getting there might be a challenge for Carl right now.
I would said the same thing about Kyle Busch, though, not really liking the way these cars drive, but he was able to go out and win a championship last year. So I definitely think Carl Edwards would have a shot, especially the last few years with Homestead being the finale and how good he was at Homestead, especially early on in his career. As long as he stayed in competitive equipment, I would have definitely not counted Carl Edwards out. As of now, he's only like 40 years old, and that's still, you could say, is like prime career time period for NASCAR drivers. So I think Carl Edwards, if he'd stayed with Joe Gibbs Racing, very well would have been as competitive as he was before he left.
Yeah, I agree. If you look at how Joe Gibbs Racing has done in these years since Carl Edwards left the sport, Martin Truex Jr. was contending for a championship. Denny Hamlin's been contending for a championship. Kyle Busch won a championship. None of these cars have been lackluster performance-wise. And Carl Edwards, I think he would have been right up there with, all of their Joe Gibbs teammates, competing for championships if he had stayed.
Well, Eric, you mentioned Kyle Busch. If Kyle would have never left Roush, I feel like there would have been a whole trickle-down effect that would have changed NASCAR drastically. So how would that have affected other drivers?
Man, that would have been difficult because that really was, Carl Edwards' big break at Roush. it's so difficult to go back that early. I mean, we could always talk about if Kyle Busch stayed with Roush, but that's a whole nother can of worms for another time. But just the opportunity that gave Carl Edwards to get himself noticed, and the fact that he jumped kind of from trucks into a full-time Cup Series opportunity as quickly as he did, I mean, that would not have been possible. We would have not seen Carl Edwards, win 4 races his rookie season the way he did, if not for that opportunity being granted to him so early on. So he made the most of it, but that certainly was a huge stepping stone in his career.
Yeah, I think Carl Edwards might have found his way into the Roush program in some way, but it may not have come as quick as it did for him in reality. If you look at the way things worked out, that would have put Kyle Busch into the Cup Series a little bit sooner, most likely. But they say things are meant to happen for a reason, and I think it was best for both of them that happened that way.
I mean, it's the perfect storm for Carl, being vaulted into the Cup Series, and what you could say, Roush, Fenway, and Hendrick Motorsports, they were the cream of the crop. I mean, Jack Roush's Cup program used to be there contending for championships, winning championships with Kenseth and Kurt Busch. So that whole situation was really a dream scenario for Carl. I do think Carl would have made his way into the Cup Series. It may have taken him a little bit longer. Who knows who he would have raced for if he would have landed, that premier spot. He might have had to start down the ladder a little bit. Certainly, I do think, how everything played out played into his numbers being what they are and his championship opportunities being what they were.
So let's say that he won in 2011, that championship at Homestead, and never left Roush. More championships for Carl Edwards? How different would that have made it if that 2011 trophy had Carl Edwards' name on it?
I think he'd still be in the 99 car. I mean, he might not still be there now, but I don't think he ever leaves Roush. I know Bob disagreed with me earlier on this, but I think we're underestimating how much a championship in 2011 could have aided Roush. And Jack keeps people around too. So even if Carl steps away, maybe he's got a front office job. Maybe he's a GM at Roush. I think you look completely down the line and say, man, how many cars is Roush fielding in 2020 if Carl Edwards won that 2011 championship? Does Carl get multiple championships for Jack Roush and elevate them? Is Joe Gibbs racing because Carl stayed here? Is Jimmy Johnson because Carl stayed here? The ripple effect to that is astronomical, I think.
I think Carl Edwards, if he wins that championship, he definitely stays with Roush for, I think, a longer period of time. But I'm not convinced he would have stayed with Roush Fenway all the way until 2015 or 2016. I think with some of the other veteran drivers he kind of grew up racing around, like Matt Kenseth jumping ship over to Joe Gibbs Racing, and then Greg Biffle basically retiring just a couple of years later. I think at some point he might have looked at what he was kind of working with. Roush Fenway became a much younger team very quickly, and I don't know if that would appeal to Carl Edwards, who at the time would have been in his mid-30s, kind of hitting the prime of his career. He might have felt even then that it was time to go to a place like Joe Gibbs Racing if there was a seat available.
I just think it's hard to say yes or no that he would stay with Roush Fenway if he won a championship in 2011 because, well, that 2011 car was the old car of tomorrow. And then they did ultimately change cars in 2013 and the equipment changed and, performance may not have stayed where it was in 2011 still. And he may have still looked to go down the road and go to a new team. And I think I'm kind of with the thoughts of some others that he was still left.
I think Carl's a huge asset to the notebook. I think we talk about people going to the notebook. I think Carl is a guy that can make a difference, and clearly we saw when he left, it made a difference. It made a difference at Gibbs. It made a difference at Roush. I think you pile Carl being in the driver's seat for you and a little bit of money coming your way and exposure from sponsorship dollars and championship money. I think it's a different ballgame.
Well, I posed this question for Jonathan and Bob Pockrass from Fox Sports already, but I want to get your guys' opinion. If the career stayed the same, if it is exactly the resume that Carl Edwards has right now, and you guys get 2 votes for the NASCAR Hall of Fame, is he in it in the future or is he already in it? Is Carl Edwards a Hall of Fame inductee nominee?
I kind of agree with what Jonathan said earlier on. I think Carl Edwards, with his 28 Cup Series wins, I believe right now he has the most wins of anybody who is Hall of Fame eligible and not yet in the NASCAR Hall of Fame. So I think he certainly is a Hall of Famer one day. I think this year, I wouldn't have voted for him this year. He wouldn't have been in my top 2 this year. But I think in the next few years, without a doubt, especially with, I think there's sort of being a gap coming up. You know, we've inducted guys like Tony Stewart and now Dale Earnhardt Jr. and everything. You know, Jimmy Johnson in a few years will be a first ballot Hall of Famer. But there might be a gap coming up here in the next few years where I definitely think Carl Edwards deserves to sneak his way in.
I would say give it some time. You know, maybe the next 5 to 10 years we'll see it, but it may not be happening that soon, especially now that we're only inducting 3 at a time versus 5. So one day, maybe not anytime soon.
All right, guys. Well, I appreciate you joining us. Amazing how if one thing would have been different, we may have seen a very different outcome with Carl Edwards. But tune in to the What If Series race up next Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern on FS1. It's going to be all about Ernie Irvan. And if he didn't hit the wall at Michigan, what would have happened? Don't forget to leave your comments below. You can tag all of us on all of the social media platforms if you disagree or if you agree and just want to give your opinion. And we'll see you guys right back here next time.